Koichi he thought I could do anything. And he would challenge me to do that, you know, and so that was fun for me. And then being able to try these new things, or, even whenever we shot, Wicked Game, Extreme Heist, there were moments throughout where he was like, what about taking a car hit? What about jumping through this car door window, and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And he was like, well, let's try it. And then, so he challenged me in a lot of different ways. And I saw myself, I did adjust, and I did learn more of stunt fighting and telegraphing the right way, for camera. Yeah, so it was definitely different for me. I learned quite a bit. Power Rangers was like school for me. It was like, but the problem was, it was me doing it wrong in the beginning. And then it's like, well, it's out there. It's me doing it wrong.
This is an interview with Johnny Yong Bosch. Johnny is an actor, stuntman, filmmaker, motion capture performer, musician, and voiceover actor known for his role in the Power Rangers series, the anime Akira, the video game series Devil May Cry, and an amazing indie action film called Extreme Heist. And he's also the villain in my feature film Death Grip. We talk about how he got into the business and how he keeps pushing his craft. Hear about your pop culture influences growing up, what you were watching, what you were playing, TV shows.
Dukes of Hazzard, Knight Rider, Airwolf, Street Hawk. Is that what it was called? Street Hawk or Street Knight? The motorcycle. Was it The Master? Kung Fu. I mean, I watched everything. I watched anything my dad was watching, or anything that I thought was kind of cool. I somehow got into, like, on the weekends, like on, I think it was Sundays, they would show like Kung Fu theater. And when I watched some of that, I was like, what is that? Because I've never seen anybody do those things, because you watch some of the American TV shows or whatever, they weren't doing that kind of stuff. And then I was like, that's really cool. They're doing these really cool acrobatic fight scenes. And I just fell in love with it. Like Kung Fu theater was like, I lived for that. I had a couple like obscure favorites, like Shaolin versus Lama, or Crystal Fist, aka Jade Fist, aka there's another name for it. But how they had so many different names then. But Billy Chong, I think, was in that one. And then I, fell into like the Jackie Chan, Sammo Yumbio, and Bruce Lee. And I just started watching them all, and it continued, after, I got on the Power Rangers and all that. And although when I was younger, in high school, my mom, she's Korean, and my mom would work, she's like a seamstress. So she would go to the sewing factory. It's kind of in this Koreatown in Texas. And occasionally I would go with her, and there was this video store in like the back. I just remember it being in the back of a store, and it was very shady. And there was just VHS tapes everywhere. I could tell that they were, bootlegging them, because it was like they would tape over the little thing or whatever, so that they could record over it or whatnot, or snapping the thing off. So I just remember. And then the whatever it was on there was like, it was like was it not duct tape, masking tape, and then written in whatever Kung Fu movie it was, and then that's how I kind of fell into like Jet Li. I was like, what is this? I'll check this out. And then, yeah, just kind of grew from there, and I just fell in love with it. And then that spurred on my like desire to like learn Kung Fu. Anyways, I can go on forever, I guess, on that sort of stuff. But then, yeah, I got into Kung Fu and martial arts and went from there.
Like, what did you see that was different about Kung Fu cinema, particularly the action style, as compared to all the American or whatever you were watching at the time?
Okay, so like the American shows, it was more like, they'd throw a punch, maybe they'd throw like a front kick, maybe, but mostly it's just these big haymakers, and the guy would like and fall down. I watched a lot of Westerns as well. But it's that kind of fighting. It wasn't they weren't like rolling over things or using their environment or picking up a chair and spinning it around and using it as like, I don't know, like another weapon. And I would see them, in Hong Kong cinema, or which was mostly what I had seen. Like, it was just completely different. They used their environment, and it wasn't just a punch and the guy fell down, or two punches and the guy fell down, and they're kind of wrestling and then the guy gets shot and they die. It was like a lot of action, nonstop. And it was they were connected the whole time. And it was, I don't know, it's just really interesting to watch. And plus, once you see people doing flips, it's like, whoa, I don't even remember if the old Spider-Man TV show had flips or not. But yeah, it was totally different from what I was used to,
Yeah, I'm thinking back to the Batman show. In red, as when I think about it, I think like, oh, it's kind of goofy, but actually when you watch those fights, those are Western style brawls. That was sort of like, that's just how you did fight scenes, whether you're Batman or John Wayne. It's gonna be punch, get grabbed, kick this guy off, swing on a chandelier, throw this guy through a table. It all seemed to kind of be the same stuff, but it was like kind of, I look at those Batman shows and like I can actually really appreciate that stuff now, because like those look like legit bar fights in a Batman show.
Yeah, no, they were fun. I watched that too. Green Hornet, I didn't see until a bit later. I didn't even know it existed. It wasn't something I think that played when I had to kind of go find it. It was one of those things, like after I knew who Bruce Lee was, then I went and watched it and was like, oh man, that is pretty cool. Like I wish I would have seen that, in the progression of things to watch or whatever, in the order of things. But yeah. Yeah, no, those the big pow bang boom kind of things that were happening throughout there. That's the way the action was. I could appreciate it for sure, because a lot of that was, I mean, a big wide master shot probably in most of them, and they just went for it.
I don't assume there was any anime circulating around at the time, was there?
I mean, there were some anime that I got into. It was definitely later, maybe high school, I guess. There was Battle Angel, Alita, Ninja Scroll. Akira was also one that I'd seen before I even was part. I actually saw it in it was like a Japanese cinema magazine or something. And I remember, no, it wasn't. Sorry, it was talking about that. There's a section of it in this magazine that was talking about Japanese cinema or whatever, and they called the animation Japanimation. In the thing, I was like, Japanimation, what is that? And I remember seeing Akira in there. But yeah, that was another one I saw. Vampire Hunter D, Bloodlust. There were a few there that I remember seeing back in that time. Fist of the North Star was another one. But I think I saw the actual live action before I saw the anime. It made me want to go see the anime.
Live action one. I think the live action one has the world record for most number of mullets in one fight scene.
Yeah. Who was that? Gary Daniels in that? Is that right?
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd also like to know like what the martial arts scene looked like in Texas, and what got you into doing martial arts, why that martial arts school.
A couple things. First off, there's my love for just kung fu cinema. And I just found that really interesting, and I thought it was cool. And it was like all these different animals that you can learn or whatever, or the drunken style. I'm like, what? And I don't know, there's a lot there, and it was very interesting to me, but I got picked on a lot. I grew up in Texas. There was some racism that I felt, but it wasn't like here and there, it wasn't like consistent, because my friends were all different races, growing up. It was just like occasionally I'd run into somebody who was like that. And I got picked on all the time from all races. So I got picked on a lot. And in sixth grade, I went to one school and I got into so many fights. It wasn't anything I started. I just got picked on, like being the little kid, and the quiet kid. And then it made me super insecure because I just got beat up all the time. And I wanted to learn martial arts. My dad took me out of that school, that middle school, moved to a different school, hoping I wouldn't get into any fights there, but I got picked on and beat up over there too. And so he was like, all right, I'm going to take you to a martial arts school. Cause there was some stuff. I called him my uncle. I don't even know if he was my uncle, but some guy showed me some Taekwondo a long time ago. And I thought it was my uncle. It was my mom's friend or whatever that she brought over. And he showed me a few things, and then, but I was really little then. But anyways, so I went to look for a martial arts school with my dad, and we went around, and it was all karate and all Taekwondo. I really wanted Kung Fu, and we were trying to find Kung Fu, and back then you couldn't like Google it and look things up. You had to go through like the yellow pages or the white pages and try to find a place. And I couldn't find a Kung Fu school. And so we just went around to all the close schools, which were mostly Taekwondo. And a lot of the schools were really beautiful schools that, they had great lighting. They had, like polished, statues and rails and all this great stuff. And I remember going in, and I would see how great the school looked. And then I would watch like some of the students, and there would be like the instructor would come by and he would point out this one student, and he was like the great student, was doing all these really crazy spin kicks and stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then I look at all the other students and I'm like, well, why aren't they doing it? And I felt that and saw that at a bunch of these karate and Taekwondo schools. Like there was like always like a person, like a single person that was really good, and the rest were like, And I'm like, and again, I didn't really know anything about like belts and whatnot. Obviously, the guys they were showing me were their black belts or whatnot. But then when I went to this Kung Fu school, we found one, and it was Shaolin Kung Fu. So first off, it's saying Shaolin. I was like, yes, this is like exactly what I'm looking for. And then I go in, and it's that real hard kind of carpet. It was like cement underneath, and then a super thin layer of carpet that was like stained, most likely blood. There were holes in the wall. I could tell some of them were like somebody was kicked into a wall and just caved in. Some of the lights didn't work. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, wow, I don't know about this. And then every student was awesome. And they were really good. And in anything that they were doing. And they were doing things that were also sort of the things that interest me, and their spin kicks were great. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. The other thing I really liked, even though there was a lot of, respect and stuff like bowing and that sort of thing, they were having fun. The instructor was, he was strict, but he wasn't like, I don't know. It didn't feel like he was someone who was far off and you couldn't talk to him. He was like very personable with everyone, and would help them out individually. And I'm like, this is great. And so I started studying there, and it was a Shaolin Kung Fu school. Grandmaster James Clark, we called him Coco. And I learned so much, and I was able to pick up things, when you're in that age where you can just pick things up easily. I just picked up things super easily. I also had like self-taught myself quite a few things, like just from watching Jackie Chan. I'm rambling on. You can cut me off at any point, but because it brings me back. There's a lot of great things. I have a lot of great memories. But anyways, I started there. Shaolin Kung Fu was the first thing that I did. In fact, it was like, he's the reason why I even went to the audition for Power Rangers. He was like looking in the newspaper, and he's like, I think you should go give it a shot. He knew I wanted to do, action, martial arts action on television. And I was a fan. He was a fan of Kung Fu films too, which was great because he loved Shaolin versus Lama. And I was like, I like Shaolin versus Lama, and he'd like seen all the same stuff. And we kind of had that relationship. And there was a point where I couldn't pay for the membership anymore. And he was just like, don't worry about it. Just come. And so that also was really cool, you know. It was like my second home. Like I couldn't wait to go there. My friends would always want to come, like, me to go out and hang out, and I was like, I want to go to the kung fu school. Or I was at home training. I built my own wooden man, and I was like trying to learn how to use it. But yeah, so that was the start of it for me. And then, you know, after Power Rangers, I ended up training quite a few different other styles. Currently, mostly doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, stick fighting, knife fighting, Balintawak. And anyways, it's kind of all over the place now. But that was definitely the start. Was kung fu for me.
Did you find that the kung fu that you were learning helped you with the bullying you were experiencing?
Yeah, it did. He was so my master was, I think he was a brown belt in judo, you know, so he kind of, even though we studied like the animals and whatnot, he tried to make everything very practical. And so there's application, I guess, you know, so it wasn't like we'd drop into a praying mantis, you know, stance or something for a fight. We did spar quite a bit. So the problem with me is, like, I think I was at a strange point where I'd been picked on so much that once I had the ability to fight, I started looking for them. You know, I was like, where are these guys that, you know, would always push me around? So anybody that looked at me wrong or would start, you know, picking on me or someone else, I would just start fighting. And I was kind of a punk at that point, you know, for a good year, until I really, it was, how do I say it? It's like at the start of my martial arts training, there's some discipline, but I didn't understand it. It was like, I want to use this, you know, and I wanted revenge in a way. So I got into a bunch of fights. It did help. The kung fu I learned did make me not only faster, but I could see things a lot clearer. And you know, especially at that time, there wasn't like MMA or anything. So people threw punches like they saw in, you know, Western cinema, you know, big haymakers that were like super easy to see, and they were really telegraphed. I became a bit of a punk, you know, and then there's, you know, there's an incident where my brother and my dad were having an argument, and then I pulled them apart, and I almost punched my dad, and I was like, whoa, what am I doing? And he walked away. And I remember, and this is hard for me to even talk about, but I'll just gloss through it. But, you know, I went into his room to apologize because I couldn't believe that I did that. And he was sitting on his bed, and he's looked at me, he's like, I'm afraid of you. And in that moment there changed, you know, my perspective on everything. And then my understanding of martial arts, you know, and from there I had a different perspective when it came to studying. You know, I was like, it's more about self-defense. And then I started to actually listen. So that was like my early belt, you know, early belts, where I was learning how to do things. And then there was that point, and then from that point on, I was like, I don't know, I didn't need to fight anymore. I don't know what it was. That was the main thing with my dad. But then I really started to understand what I was learning, and that it didn't need to prove myself, I guess, really, but it did work for me at the time.
It's an awesome story, dude. Thanks for sharing that. That's cool. I'm watching a kung fu movie as you're talking about this, as you're describing it. It's called Johnny Young Bosch, the punk kung fu kid, man. Like, it's in my head.
Yeah, I was a punk, man. I hung around with, I mean, I had all kinds of friends. I played soccer. And so like half of the friends in Texas, like half of them, they're multiracial, but like a lot of them were Hispanics, and some of the guys were in gangs, and I became really good friends with those guys, and I would hang out with them. So there's a mix of people that I saw, you know, and that I hung out with. And so I don't know. Yeah, I definitely went through a period of just being a punk for sure. Until that moment, then I was like, what am I doing? You know, it made me see further down into the future of like, wait a second, if I keep going, then my future it's going to be dark. It's bad news. You know, I'm just going to get into trouble, and I'm going to feel bad because I'm going to hurt people. And so I was like, what's this way look? You know, what does this look like? But you know, I guess that's how everyone goes through that, right? You know, you go through things, and then you adjust your your direction a little bit.
Do you think that going into doing Power Rangers was kind of an off-gassing sort of an outlet for you?
That was something else. That was, like it had been this big dream of mine. It had been a big dream of mine to do action on television. Something like Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee. Like I just wanted to do action on television. I would shoot these movies with my friends, in these little home movies that were ridiculous, but we're doing little action stuff, and I would do some acrobatics or whatnot. So that was what I wanted to do. So actually being on Power Rangers, it was so big, so much more than I expected, that it didn't really hit me until later. It was like, I mean, it was not later, but it was like 2 weeks into actually filming, because everything was crazy. And so it was like a couple weeks in, and I remember they're setting up lights and they're setting up cameras and the crew is getting ready. I've got these rollerblades on that I'm supposed to, roll around in on the sidewalk, and I don't even know how to use them. So I'm like trying to teach myself to do this. There's the sun's coming up, there's dew on the grass. And then it at that moment, it just kind of hit me, because I was like, wait a second, this is it. Like all that time of me wanting to be able to do these things, I'm finally here. It was an interesting moment. So I don't know. I think just Power Rangers for me, it was just so like, where am I? Like, even though I was there for, was it 160 something episodes, and for about 3 years ish, it just felt like everything was like nonstop for me. We worked a lot. We worked long hours. And then once it was gone, then it was like, wait a second, I didn't prepare for what was next. It was like all of this happened, and now what do I do? I went through so many different changes of who I am throughout there.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on your kung fu training before we move on to Rangers? Did you learn animal styles? Did you learn weapon styles? What was the sparring like?
Yeah, we learned different animal styles, the typical ones, crane, snake, panther, tiger, dragon, praying mantis as well. They were all incorporated within. They were actually more within the forms that we did, the katas or whatever. It was like they were thrown in there, and then it was like, well, what is this? But then there's other things too. There's various different forms you would do. There's a lot of weapons forms, so Chinese broadsword and spear, and there's whip chain and 3-sectional staff. There's like all sorts of weapons that you could just go and then learn them. There's all sorts of stuff. So I did learn quite a few things here and there. As far as weapons, I had like Chinese broadsword was something I really enjoyed. Tai Chi sword was another one. I did Tai Chi at the same school. There was 2 styles. There was Northern style and there's Southern style. And so the Northern style was definitely flashier, had a lot more spinning kicks, and, felt faster and smoother and rounder in motions. And the Southern style was definitely a harder style. And they were also trying to incorporate in the Southern style, like Muay Thai was also another thing they were adding to that. And actually our Southern style instructor had like these other weapons he was like creating. They were just other bladed weapons and whatnot. They're what are those, hook swords or whatnot. Nunchucks weren't something that we were training. That wasn't part of our system. I bought some though, and I would just watch it, Bruce Lee, and I had like these books that I try to figure out what this guy is doing in the book and how he's spinning it. Sparring. So sparring was like there were all the Taekwondo and karate schools. There were 2 ways where we would spar. Like, I guess you would think of like now, like you would put some gloves on, headgear, mouthpiece, and then you go at it, and if things started to get a little heavy, he would break it up, or he'd point some things out here and there. But then there was also where we had to learn how the Taekwondo's guys did their tournaments, which was more of a point thing. you know? So then it was about speed. We would learn different techniques, and certain tournaments you could kick to the groin and you couldn't always, you know? So we had like, there's like certain, like a flip kick. You could always do like I would score all the time with this flip kick because the Taekwondo guys would always try to kick high and at the head, and I'd just flip kick and get them in the groin whenever, you know, we were allowed to. But then, yeah, their thing was very, it was like a point system in those tournaments. So we learned that as well. So it's like kind of two. So it was like we would do a lot of the forms training, the katas. We would do a lot of exercising, a lot of horse stance, you know, or cat stance and things like that, and movements, almost like you would learn in a school now, where you'd have like, you got to learn these self-defense moves as well. You know, somebody's attacking you with a knife or whatever, and this and that, and there's a bunch of these self-defense things that you had to learn as well. So it was like, it was not like, it wasn't like what I'd seen in the Kung Fu theater movies, you know. But there's certainly similarities. And it felt okay. And the other thing I noticed is it was less Wushu, which I felt like a lot of the guys that I know that studied any kind of Kung Fu, you know, anywhere else, it looked more Wushu, you know, and what I was learning felt more like, you know, I don't know, Jackie Chan, Peking opera or whatever. You know, it was like, it felt maybe a little more Americanized, I guess, you know, even though we had like the same stances, it just didn't look the same. And you know what I'm talking about. Like Wushu, when you see somebody who does like Jet Li or whatever, and you're like, as a Wushu guy, you know, and you could just see it, you could just spot it. And so like our stuff wasn't exactly like that.
Do you think that the Southern styles are trying to be more applicable?
I think that the Southern style there was definitely trying to be more applicable to fighting in the street or whatever else, or something that you could actually, that wasn't as, here's an animal style, that, you know, it wasn't like tiger in Southern style. It was like, I guess you could do that, but it definitely seemed more like they're incorporating a bit more street fighting style to it. I felt it was definitely a good thing. It was practical. It felt right. But I also just really liked spin kicks. I really liked the jumping, you know, and I did like the animals. So, you know, even though Southern was cool, I really loved doing the Northern stuff, you know, because for me, that was like, you know, like what people think of tricking today. You know, it was like, this is the tricking school. This is the Northern style, it seemed like. And yeah, you know, and the movements, I liked the hand movements, you know, and like everything I learned from Kung Fu then, I kind of see it again through the different stuff that I learned now, even doing a little bit of Wing Chun here and there. I'm like, yeah, this is the same sort of thing, movements that I did here. Or not really Wing Chun, but like when I was like Filipino stuff, I'm like, that is very similar to this. Even jujitsu, you know, just that's very different, but just understanding body mechanics, I guess. I learned it all there, and then it's just progressed, you know.
You were seeing these other martial arts schools that were more Wushu. How would you define the difference between your Northern style and the Wushu style?
I don't even know the name of, you know, when it's almost like you do it when you stretch, where you have both your hands and you're like swinging them one way or the other, and this way or that way. The stances sometimes seemed a little bit deeper. There's more extension. It felt, and I don't mean this to sound bad, but it like I'd seen like older Wushu guys spar, and it looked like they were just slap fighting, because it was just like so and it didn't look like, you know, like what I was used to seeing or what we trained to do. Is like, oh, this swing comes this way, you hit here the arm, and then you strike here. It felt like we maybe were it was a little more modernized, I guess, maybe even the stuff that I was learning. Like there's not any, like when you see Jet Li in Fist of Legend, when he puts his guard up, right? And it's like it seems a little unnatural for him, you know. But you could, I don't know really how to pinpoint it or how to describe it, but you could see it. And even the way he kicks, you know, it almost seems like there is no chamber, maybe. Or it looks kind of not as, I don't know if it's not as powerful. It just kind of seems more like, you know, if they did chamber and they kick out, they just like, they don't rechamber, they don't bring it back in. It just goes whip, boom, and goes down or something, you know. It just looks a little different. Not that it's less powerful. It just was different, you know.
No, they don't actually. Well, they do wrestle. Like they grab people and throw them up, and they do a front 1.25 to their stomach, and they're deton. Like, what is deton? You fall down on the ground style.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I don't know where I even saw that stuff. It's definitely it was on a tape. It was on one of those VHS tapes that I got. It's like the Hungar style or whatever. And then when I saw it, and I was like, this is a hard style. But then when I saw him doing it, like the form looked really cool. I was like, that's a cool form. But then when they went into like a spar, it just looked like they were slapping. And it was like they were like fully extended arms and legs were almost fully extended. And they were just like, bah, 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 you know, kicking, and it was like both of them. Like there was not any like, you know, trying to read the opponent, you know, move and then counter or whatever. It was just like, we're just going to both go in swinging and hitting each other. Is what it looked like to me. And I was like, wow, that's interesting that they didn't, like, I don't know, like you want to maybe evade something, you know, and try to counter, go low, go high, you know. There wasn't any of that. And I think that's where I was also really into like just Bruce Lee stuff, you know, because it's like, then it's like really technical, you know, feinting people, you know, and that kind of stuff, you know. It's like I could see where he's like, this stuff is kind of silly, you know. You kind of, if you're really going to be learning how to fight, you know, or defend yourself, then it's, you know, these other things, you know.
I think we should get to Rangers now.
Okay.
And I would like to hear you talk about moving in the fight scenes. Was it a rude awakening? Was it difficult learning how to fight? Like, did you have to learn to stunt fight? Like, was it a crash course? And who taught you? Like that, just dive into that.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So when I got on to Power Rangers, there's three of us, myself, Steve Cardenas, and Karen Ashley. And Steve and I are both martial artists. He was a Taekwondo guy, and Karen was a dancer. So we didn't really have, there was like one day where we did like it wasn't even actually a rehearsal. We were shooting. And Jeff Pruitt was actually shooting the action stuff at this time. And he was, either we couldn't figure it out or something, but you know, there's something supposed to be pulling us backwards. And you know, I remember just kind of thinking, oh, I'm just going to go like this and feel like something's pulling me backwards. But then all of us were, the three of us were there, and Pruitt was like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, well, what's going on? And he's like, it's like you're being pulled, and he kind of like shows us what he's doing. And then for me, I was like, I feel like I'm doing that, but maybe I'm not, you know? And then we try it again, and it's wrong again. And then he comes over, and then he grabs us all by the back of our pants and starts yanking us backwards. You know, it's like this, you got to feel this. And he starts pulling us back. And then I'm like, okay, I mean, that definitely feels different, because he's yanking on us. And so I was like, all right, well then now I changed where, like, I think I was like thinking my entire back is like falling backwards. Whereas now I'm like, I've got a point where like, where I felt him pulling me. So now I'm gonna, that's where I'm being pulled from now. And so doing that, then it was like, okay, that was it. That worked. And I'm like, oh, okay. The thing about Power Rangers at that time, we couldn't do any headshots. So we couldn't kick or punch the putties or monsters in the face because it, you know, it was too violent for kids or whatnot. And so what I really liked doing was kicking high, but I couldn't do that. And so that was definitely strange for me. And if you go back and you look at some of the earlier stuff when I had first come on the show, you could tell that I'm holding my kicks lower, but like I'm trying to extend, like it feels weird. And also the other thing is, like, when you study martial arts, you don't telegraph, you know, so it's like it's pretty direct. You don't, you know, it's not like making things really wide. It's straight, and it's hidden, and it's fast. Like for me, it was like, my thing and probably partly because I'd learned the point martial arts stuff, sparring as well, that, you know, when I would do things, I felt like it had to be fast. I also learned that from Bruce Lee, you know, it's be fast, be the first one. And so everything I did was too fast. You know, even my acting was just too fast. And you know, I didn't have any acting training, you know, it was like my martial arts infected everything. So everything was like fast, like in my martial arts, everything was really fast. And it wasn't until after Pruitt when Alpha Stunts, Koichi, Yuji, and those guys got in there, because we had great stunt guys. We always had great stunt people in there, but I didn't really see anything that I was like, I need to do this. Like it didn't make sense, or I didn't see anything clear that I was like, that's different from what I'm doing, until I saw Alpha Stunts and I saw Yuji doing a front kick. I'm like, that was a really clean looking front kick. And I remember just thinking like, is it slower? What is he doing? You know, and he's like, he's using more hip, and I was like, the extension, like I could see every bit of it, the details of the kick. And then every move that he did, I could see the details of it. When he'd do like a Seiuchi and he'd fall over and land on his back, I could see him hit the ground and go, whatever, right? And I'm like, oh, so I'm like, I shouldn't be hiding these things. And so I that started to change. And then of course, Koichi, you know, like I hung out with those guys because they were just cool, and fun to be around. And Koichi kind of like took me under his wing and started showing me different things, and like, try this or try that. And so, because I'm not saying that I was better, but I was, Koichi he thought I could do anything. And he would challenge me to do that, you know, and so that was fun for me. And then being able to try these new things, or, even whenever we shot, Wicked Game, Extreme Heist, there were moments throughout where he was like, what about taking a car hit? What about jumping through this car door window, and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And he was like, well, let's try it. And then, so he challenged me in a lot of different ways. And I saw myself, I did adjust, and I did learn more of stunt fighting and telegraphing the right way, for camera. Yeah, so it was definitely different for me. I learned quite a bit. Power Rangers was like school for me. It was like, but the problem was, it was me doing it wrong in the beginning. And then it's like, well, it's out there. It's me doing it wrong. And then eventually, like, but it's kind of interesting, I guess, to see, because then it's like, well, then you can kind of see a progression, from where I started to like whatever I'm doing now, so it's all right, I guess. I take it.
Was he almost like a martial art teacher for you at that time? It's kind of a similar vibe.
Koichi was definitely like my sensei. Absolutely. Koichi was like the guy I looked up to. If he was, it wouldn't matter. I mean, even now, like if he were to say, hey, Johnny, I've got a thing, I need you to do this, what I'd be there, it's just the way. I just have so much respect for him, and he really kind of like made me into who I am action wise, I guess, and carved out, what I can do, my abilities. So absolutely, he's definitely my sensei, for sure.
Were there other, like, what else did you socialize with him? Go eat with him, hang out with him? What other influences?
Yeah, I went out with them. I whatever I knew of Japanese culture started with them, really. I mean, yeah, I've seen, I watched, like Seven Samurai and whatever else. But it was really those guys where I really got to see that culture, through them, just the way they squat, that they all smoked. I didn't pick up smoking because of that, but I was like, man, they all smoke except for Koichi. Koichi didn't. And yeah, I hung out with them. I went out to eat with those guys. And I picked up some of the language, right? But it was more like I could understand it without really knowing, And it started, it was, I mentioned this before, but it's like like the 13th warrior, where you're around these guys enough, then you start to pick up the language. But it was like I just kind of understood just by being around them. They'd still explain certain things to me, but I'm like, oh no, I got that. Because I would end up laughing at things, and they're like, wait, did you understand that? I'm like, well, I did understand that, but yeah, I'm not faking that. It'd be weird, but yeah, I hung out with them all the time, or any chance that I could. They actually did, there's, where was it? Not LA Valley College, but they did train there too occasionally. But there was another school out in Santa Clarita, like a gymnastics place, where they would go occasionally there. And, whenever they were there, they're like, hey, if you want, you can come with us. And then I would go there. And that's when I really saw them doing these things that I was like, whoa, like off of the mini tramp, and just these other flips and stuff. And then that's where I got to try out some new things, and that's where it's like they're showing, well, you got to get a sense of the air, or they're showing me, Tatsuro was the one who was like a great gymnast, and so he could do these backhand springs like in a row, whatever. Like he is that kind of guy. So to see him do stuff, and then he would see me do it, and then he would say, all right, what you're doing is wrong is this, and he'd point things out, Yeah. And then, we'd stretch with them or whatever. And there's, I got a lot from those guys,
Did you find that Koichi was trying to break any habits that you had picked up in the street, in kung fu school, whirlwind arms?
No, I didn't feel like Koichi was trying to break me of bad training scars. It, I think in his eyes, he saw the potential of me being better just by challenging me to do a different thing. And then what I really felt helped me was in doing some of those things, then he would say, hey, come over here. And he would show me, because what it sometimes felt like I was doing, I was like, am I not doing what you're telling me to do? And then he would bring me over to the video village, and I'd watch playback, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then he would show like either my extension wasn't right or whatever it was, I could see it, or he'd point out some of the things that maybe somebody else was doing that he's like, see this right here, this is just the way that they do their thing, and it's not going to change. But with you, I want you to see this so that you could, do it a different way or do it like this, so I learned that way too, because you don't really, it's like, well, this is another thing. Back in the kung fu school that I trained at, there were no mirrors. At the taekwondo schools and karate schools, there were mirrors everywhere, and people were training in front of mirrors and whatnot. At the kung fu school, I never saw what I was doing until I was on Power Rangers doing it, so Koichi would show me what I was doing during playback or whatnot, and then they would adjust me then, and then I'm like, oh, okay, which was strange because I had to sometimes see it because it felt like I was doing it, but it wasn't until I saw it. I'm like, oh, well, clearly I'm not. Well, what is it that, and it's like understanding what it feels like I'm doing, what I think I'm doing, and like the small adjustment of pushing your hip out or whatever it was, or fully extending, or whatnot.
You kind of had that aha moment 2 weeks into shooting Power Rangers. Was there another aha moment where suddenly you feel like you are moving in a new way, you're seeing action in a new way? Did you appreciate Japanese action differently after that, like Japanese culture?
First off, Alpha Stunts, I always thought they were pretty stinking amazing. The stuff that they would do, like it looked like they defied gravity in a way. It looked like whatever flip or whatever thing they could like make it slow down or something. Like it felt like there was, like I could see it all before whatever, before they crashed or whatnot. Like they would get hit and they do the Hong Kong spin, right? And they just, and they crash. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I've seen that in movies before, but I don't think I've ever tried it before. And they had these crash mats off to the side. And so it was like Yuji is doing these just really, he'd just take off. I'd see him do the takeoff, right? And so I was like, oh, that's how you take off in that. And they did it a couple different ways, but there's one where it's like a wind up, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And so I saw him do that, and then I went off while they were shooting something else, and I went to the crash pad and I started trying to do these Hong Kong spins and crash into the mat. And when I did it, I spooked myself. I got scared and I put my foot down and I'm like after I spun, I threw my foot down and I'm like, wait a second, I just landed that. And then I was like, hang on a second. So I did it again. And then I threw my foot down the same time. I'm like, wait, I could land this. I don't have to crash. And so I did it over and over until I could kind of see where I was. I got the sense of the air and then my timing and where was like, and then it went back to when I watched Only the Strong. I'm like, oh, this is the Only the Strong kick. Mark Dacascos does this. And it's like, I could do this now. And so it's like, oh, that's how you do this. And it's a wind up, into that. And yeah, I pieced that together. So there was a moment there, and then
It's almost like doing it allows you to then, you're like doing it, thinking about it, processing it, and then when you see it, and you see Mark Dacascos doing it, and you're like, I've seen that before, but now I really see it.
yeah, it absolutely. Well, it's like jujitsu, right? Like you don't really know what's going on. You just think two guys are rolling around on the ground wrestling, until you're like in there and you kind of know technique. Then it's like, it's like these aha moments, like you're saying. But yeah, it definitely was like for me an aha moment where I was like, that's what that thing is, and that's what Jackie Chan does off of the stairs in Armor of God. Yeah, I don't even remember that, right? When he does and he lands it, I'm like, that's that same thing. And I started seeing it in other things. I'm like, oh, that's it. I think Jet Li was doing it too on another film. Oh, it also made me feel like, wait, I've progressed. This is like next level for me, right? And then so I was then like, well, what's the next thing? Like, and then it was like, well, what are they doing off of the mini tramp? And then seeing them do these things where they're spinning and landing. And I'm like, how in the world am I going to do that? And then I'd watch them, and then I'd try it, or I'd ask them, and they're like, oh, well, you got to wait till you got to spot it. You got to, and there's different ways you can start your spin or your tuck or whatever it was. And then, yeah, just kind of like started learning little bits in here and there or whatever. But it wasn't like I was like in a school studying. It was like I'd watch them do something awesome and I'm like, let me go try that. Even just little things that they would do like off of a slide, or like when we shot Wicked Game or Extreme Heist, they were doing these there. It was Yuji, I think. Yeah, it was Yuji. It's this thing off of this stair, right? This rail. And they're just trying to think of something. They're like, let's just do something that we haven't seen before, and he was just playing around and then he gets hit and then he hangs on the rail, he slides down and then hits the bottom of it and it spins him around to the ground. And I was like, what? But these guys, it was really cool to see them like that, because when it came to Power Rangers, there was no rehearsal. It was like you just showed up and the fight scene was going to be, Koichi would just talk. It was like, are you going to do this? You're going to do that? And then sometimes he'd say, Johnny, what do you want to do? But a lot of times it was, you just did it. You didn't rehearse, which was later when I found out, like when you do a project and there's like tons of rehearsal and getting things right. And I'm like, this is interesting. I kind of prefer just showing up. Like when we did our thing, you did the same. It was the same thing. It was like, we didn't rehearse. It was just like, what are we going to do? We just kind of figured it out right then and there. But I really liked that too, but I saw those guys like Yuji, and Koichi and them just, Yuji would sometimes, and I have this character in my head, like whenever I write stories and stuff, I think of like this kind of a character that goes off and he sits and kind of squats like a Japanese guy would squat, and he puts a cigarette in his mouth because he smoked then, and he'd sit there and he'd be in deep thought. And he puts a cigarette out and he comes back, and then he's got like this idea. That's what they did like all the time. They go like, they'd be discussing, what are we going to do here? That has to be something flashy or some kind of like whatever it was, like a ladder, a chair, or a table and whatnot. They're trying to think of like something creative to do. And then they would discuss it. They would walk through a kind of a concept or where Koichi wanted the cameras to be. And then I would see, Yuji and Tatsuro go over and they're going, it's smoke. They didn't really talk. They kind of just smoked, and then they'd put their cigarettes out, and then they'd come back, and then they had like this idea, you know. It was interesting. It was like it really kind of cool to watch.
Do you think that the impromptu action design process on Rangers was a product of the American production saying, we don't have time, we got to shoot?
I definitely think a lot of that was, we don't have time and we need to just shoot. Koichi, the other thing that he's really good at that I'd never seen, and it's something that I picked up, he'd edit as he's shooting it, right? So you would see him go off to the side after he shot a few things, and he's like he's like editing the stuff that he just shot, and then he'd go, okay, we need to get a insert right here of the front kick into the, you know, whatever it was. Like he'd edit it real quick, and he'd come back, oh, I need this, and then I need this overhead shot or whatever. He'd edit it, you know, as he'd go along. And then at the end of the day, like after we were done, he would go, all right, give me a second. And then everyone on crew, all of us would just wait, and he'd be off on the side, just kind of with his eyes closed, like editing this stuff. He'd go through like all his edits, like everything he shot. And then he's like, okay, we're good, you know. And sometimes like come back, well, we need to get this or whatever. But yeah.
So did Koichi have control over the edit, or was that his way of controlling the edit by just not giving coverage?
You know, I'm not really sure, because he did definitely take over towards the end. So he definitely had a say because he became executive producer. But I do feel like in the beginning, it was probably so they couldn't control it. You know, I honestly don't know. And he just shot differently. You know, he didn't shoot like, it wasn't like we got a big wide master shot of most of the things and then went in and picked up some things here and there, which we were used to, you know, with Pruitt. It was a lot wider shots. Sometimes it would just be one shot, you know. Whereas Koichi would go inside the fight, you know, and it's like, we're going to do that. This is a set. This is a start. You guys come over the hill, and then you jump towards the camera, whatever it was. And then it was like, then we're in the fight, and he's editing and he's shooting inside the fight. And I remember just when you see that, the difference of it, you know, it's like, wow, that just felt a lot better than just seeing it all in one shot or two shots and just big master shot, you know. And he was actually a lot faster than what even Pruitt was doing, you know, because Pruitt would, you know, because he would try to get it in like one or two shots or whatever it was, and he had to do that with each one of us, and there's like what, 6 of us, so it was like easier to just, let me just do this, let's do this, because of time. But Koichi just kind of, he would just go in there and he would get whatever he needed, you know.
Did you guys end up rehearsing on like Extreme Heist, for example? Was that a different process, or was that also just show up and do it?
There were no fight rehearsals. I did go train with them though, but it wasn't like, we weren't training doing like whatever the action was. It was just like training, just in general, flipping off of mini tramps or whatever else. And that time too, I just broke up with someone, and I was like in a very like, I hate to use the word suicidal, but like I didn't care about myself or something, you know. I was like, I didn't care. Like I just wanted to do the craziest, dumbest thing, you know, stunt wise or whatever for me. Right. I'm like, I don't care. I just want to do it. Car hit, I'll do it, you know, or whatever else it was. And so I did as much as they would allow me to do. And they allowed me to do quite a bit, which was pretty cool. That was definitely a guerrilla shoot though. We went to Vegas at one point, and David Wald, who's now does a lot of action stuff. He's a great director now. He had this trench coat on, right? And so he was mostly running camera and whatnot. And we were supposed to, I think we were running out of like a casino or something. And so we stole every location there. And so it was like old Vegas, right? And so we're doing this, was it a chase? I can't remember exactly, but Wald would open up his trench coat and he'd have these lights under his trench coat. And it's like, all right, ready? And you look around, it's like, all right, let's go. And then he'd open up this trench coat, had these lights hanging from it, and he'd roll in the camera and we'd do the action. I remember eventually the cops the cops came over and to find out what we were doing, and then Tatsuro would go over, and he was like, oh, I'll take it. So he goes, was it Tatsuro or was it Makoto? One of those guys went over to talk to them, right? And then the rest of us went around the corner and kept shooting, and then he would use his broken English to like just run circles around these cops, and they're like, oh, shoot video, whatever, right? And but he could totally understand them, but he was like, overdoing it just so he would have enough time. He's like looking over his shoulder, and we're like, we're good, we got the shot. And he's like, oh, sorry, and then we'd leave. But that was the whole shoot was like that. Stealing locations. So because Koichi was shooting all the Power Ranger stuff, there's Power Rangers had budget, at least, they could do these big explosions. We had explosions in our movie because like when the Power Rangers, the camera was there, Power Rangers were here, the big explosion back here. Meanwhile, I'm over here off to the side with another camera getting a totally different angle of these explosions. So we were like stealing things left and right. It was pretty cool though. It was a great experience.
So you're actually, wait a minute, you were stealing explosions from Rangers?
Yes. Yeah, the Rangers had like a big explosion for the Rangers. And so it's the same explosion. We're just shooting at a different angle off to the side so we can have explosions in our film. Yeah, there's a lot of that in there.
That's inspiring, man.
It's pretty funny, man. There's a lot of stories. There's this hill. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but there's this
No,
hill.
please do.
It was like this, right? And they wanted to do a car stunt. So my character's like walking to go get gas or is coming back. I can't remember, but I have like this gas tank. And I'm supposed to walk up this peak, and then this car was supposed to come like right as we're supposed to get attacked, right? And this car is like, and I'm supposed to dive out of the way. And so the timing was action, car, Johnny, right? And so it was like action, the car, and then this car's supposed to go. No, sorry, it's backwards. It was action, Johnny, car. And so action, Johnny, I'm supposed to walk up the hill, and then car is supposed to go, and then that we timed it out. But when I'm here, I hear action, and I hear on action, the car is coming up the hill. I'm like, what? And it's like Johnny. And then as I start walking, I'm like, the car is, and then car, but the car was like already like in the air coming down on top of me. And I dove out of the way at the last second. If you find that clip, you can see it. It's like, it was just he didn't hear it. Whoever, I think it was Wald, actually. I think David was driving, but he didn't, he went on action instead of car. It was supposed to be action Johnny car, but whatever it was, I think he said he couldn't hear anything, and so he just went whenever he thought he was supposed to go.
I remember that stunt, man. I remember that. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's in every trailer, by the way.
Yeah, good time.
Probably also in like Koichi's demo reel, like, hey, look at this awesome action I can make.
Yeah,
those happy mistakes when somebody lives are very good.
Yeah. That was pretty fun. I had a good time on that.
Typical fight scene. Like how much time did you guys have when doing fights? Was it leisurely paced, or were you kind of rushing to get things done on Wicked Game?
You always feel the pressure of that time, or you're losing sun or whatever it is. I mean, you do that in anything, right? You have to cut corners here and there based on whatever. The car stops running. I think one of the cars stopped running. It's another story. One of the cars stopped running that was in like the car chase or whatnot. And so because we were in like the desert, right? So when we're shooting this, they took the car that didn't run, spray painted it. And that was the same car, I believe I kicked the windshield out of, or I jumped through, and like we're doing a fight inside it. Is that right? I remember that like they took whatever car, they were like, they paid like $400 for it or whatever. And they're like, well, we're not going to return it. And so they just spray painted it a different color, and we just fought and destroyed it. And it's probably still there to this day in the desert.
I think I've seen it. Yeah.
Right. This was really soon after I had left Power Rangers too, because I still had the long hair that I had in the season, which I really hated. But just kept it.
Did you find that working on Wicked Game, choreography wise, movement wise, Like, how different was that from working on something like Rangers, and why?
Well, if you compare it to Power Rangers, we definitely didn't have that time crunch that you could feel on Power Rangers. If, Koichi wasn't happy with something, we just keep doing it until it was right, or until he was satisfied with it. Him or Makoto were satisfied. They were both kind of like running the show. It was kind of freeing for me, again, even at that time, I didn't understand, being completely honest, I didn't understand acting. Like, I didn't take it serious. No, it wasn't that I didn't take it serious. I just didn't understand. And so I leaned on martial arts, Um, it wasn't until until I got into voiceover when I had no choice. And it's like moments I recall, even in Power Rangers, or even in Wicked Game, where it's like I'd see a glimpse of there. I would have like maybe a moment where I'd go, oh, or I'd look back and go like, I should have done that, and I didn't really get that confirmation until I watched or saw something. I'm like, yep, I should have done it this way, or I should have done it differently. But that's all part of learning. I think just it felt the same. It felt more relaxed, but it also felt like we were trying to like push the envelope. I think Koichi might have even said we're basically trying to put together like an action reel, and it was like, how many things can we do? What things can we do? Skydiving, and they did the skydiving stuff. They did car stuff, it was like everything you could think of, they wanted to try to do in their style or whatnot, in their way.
What was the what was the indie action scene like at that time? Like, not many people were making films on, what was it, Betacam that you guys were using, making an action movie nonetheless.
Yeah, I want to say it was like mini DV or something. I really don't know. All I do know is what the camera was Japanese, and when they were recording the audio, that equipment wasn't. And you've probably ran into this where the audio doesn't line up, the frame rate's different, and so I ended up having to dub myself for this film, for Wicked Game. And as I was dubbing myself, you know, one of the producers walked in, heard my voice, and was like, and Koichi and them were talking, and he's like, "Oh, you got a good hero voice." And it was because of me dubbing Wicked Game that I ended up getting an audition for Trigun, an anime, and booking that role. That's what got me into voiceover. It was because of that, that strange accident, or whatever, when things didn't line up because of the frame rate or whatnot. And I had to just go in and dub every single thing that I did in that movie.
That's an awesome story. It's almost like when I did a dub for Dogs of Chinatown. And I think that's when my hopes of acting were dashed to pieces because I sucked at it. Can you talk about your oh my gosh, the other indie action film you did on the in the house?
Oh, Broken Path. Yeah. Broken Path / Attack of the Yakuza / something else, depending on where they sold it.
Bruce Lee Strikes Again. Yeah.
Yeah. There's I remember seeing the other name, Attack of the Yakuza. I was at a convention doing autographs and somebody brought that. And I'm like, what is this? And it wasn't me on the cover. It was like some other guy. And I flip it over and it's like, oh, and it says Johnny Yong Bosch, like Yoong. So my name was misspelled. I'm like, huh, okay. And then I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is Dan Southworth. I'm like, oh, this is Broken Path. They sold it to some other territory. We had that was a very interesting one. That was one where Koichi, and how did that start? Actually, I knew somebody who knew someone else who wanted to shoot a film, and then they had this investor, and so I was like, all right, well, let's see if we can put something together. And then Koichi came on board, and Koichi had some ideas for a film that was kind of like, was it Straw Dogs? And then but like wanted to just do a ton of action and make it gory, because we like Koichi like he wanted to do a ton of action, but in that he wanted to have some story. But the producers, there were two of them, but they were like, no, just action, just do action. And Koichi's like, yeah, but we need story. And so basically he waited until because they couldn't be there. They couldn't work on certain holidays. Right. And so there's a couple holidays when they weren't around, and we're like, what is this scene? Oh, this is where we're going to put some story into this. And so we would shoot some stuff that wasn't in the script, or that was like added later or after the fact, to be able to add some story as much as we could, because the producers really didn't want it. And then they would see it in dailies and they're like, wait, what scene is this? But thankfully they liked it, that they're like, oh, we're okay with this. Yeah, this is fine. But it was really strange because they're really adamant. No, action only, action only. And that's why like 95% of that thing is action. That was pretty crazy. That was, at that time, that was the hardest thing I had ever worked on in my entire life. Dan at that time probably would have said the same thing. We butt heads in that final fight because we were tired, we were exhausted, and the fight was long, and he had sticks, right? And a couple times he hit me with those sticks, and I'm like, all right, man. And I remember we were just frustrated, and I stunk. I smelled so bad. Like I had whatever my wardrobe was that I had for, what did we shoot, 22 days or 17 days? It was something ridiculous for that thing. And they couldn't wash my stuff because it had like the blood on it. So they were using like well water or something. So it was like, once I started, and we were in the humidity of Texas, so my sweat mixed in with all that other smell just was so horrible, in that, especially in that final fight in that little barn that we were in. And the owner of the barn, I remember, again, I'm going off on tangents, but I remember we were doing this fight scene and I'm sweating, I'm stinking, and I'm like, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm just like trying to get through this fight. And the owner comes in and opens up the barn, and she's like, oh my gosh, what does that smell? I'm so embarrassed. And it's like, it's actually me. She's like, that's you?
You should have said, yeah, you got to get this place cleaned up, lady. Come on. What are we paying you for?
Yeah, that was bad. But that was, yeah, Broken Path. So Broken Path was another one that was, kind of thrown together. Koichi had, well, I say thrown together because we were having to sneak some stuff, but it was still fun. It was very hard. We did have long days there. So Broken Path, Power Rangers was, but Broken Path, we shot short ends. So that's like, when a company has like the film and they're shooting a movie, at the very end, they didn't use a little bit of it, and so that's sold back to them, and then they could sell that to, independent film. So Broken Path, we were shooting short ends. And I mean, it felt like, for me, anytime that I had a good acting moment, a good, good kick or good flip or good action, then it was like, we just rolled out, at the end of it. And it's like, no, because I remember I'd gotten to a good place when I had to like act, or whatever, in one scene, and then we rolled out, and then I'm like, oh, how am I gonna get that feeling back, and it was hard. But it's the same thing with the action stuff, and then you roll out because it's a short end, so you only have a certain amount of time to get something done before it's like it's gone. Which was nice when we shot Wicked Game, because we had, it was like mini DV or whatever, and so we just keep on going and didn't have to worry about it. There's a lot of time that comes into that too, where they have to check the lights and where's the sun at, and there's so much more, that came into it with film. The other thing is that with film is there wasn't, well, on Power Rangers there was, but you didn't get to, on an indie film, you usually get to see a playback usually, it's like, what you got is what you got, especially on a lower budget indie kind of a project. Anyhow, so that was a little bit of a tangent there. That we were shooting short ends, whereas I guess.
What was the choreography process like with Koichi on Wicked Game and Broken Path? Was it collaborative?
Wicked Game, I think they just had things they wanted to do, like a list of like, we're doing skydiving, we're doing car chase, we're doing a final fight, we're doing whatever it was. Like they had like a bunch of these things that they knew they wanted to do. There was a script. Obviously the fights weren't really broken out. And so until we got there. And that's really just the way Koichi works. And I do feel like the writer did write, whatever action beats that were in there. But then when we were there, it was like, we just knew that we were going to ignore them basically and figure out what we're going to do at that time. And it just depended on Koichi and the stunt team, and what we had, whatever action pieces they were. Like they had located like this window, this sugar glass or whatever it was, and it was like a window. And in shipping, they had two of them, I think. Or no, they had one big one, and it broke. And so part of it was shattered, but then I had to throw a guy through the window. And so instead they cheated the angle, and then they held it, and they basically improvised the whole thing, and they threw him out. And I think it was Tadahiro who did like all the craziness in that one, crashed through the glass in that one. He went over the railing on the second floor. Thankfully, his head hit the sofa, but the rest of him didn't. Man, that guy is crazy. But yeah, there's a lot of craziness there. But it was the same sort of thing. Because Dan, again, the reason why Dan was there is because, or any of those guys actually, because they were stunt guys that were actors, and so they can pull off the stunts without having to do, rehearsals. It was like we just show up, and then we talk it through, and whatever Koichi's ideas, whatever he wanted to see. Like sometimes he was like, what kind of fall would you do off of here? Or whatever it was. And it's like, well, I want to see you guys do some fighting on here. Like he had like some things, like an outline of where things were going to go or what was going to happen in the fight. And then we would go in and we would shoot this part of it, like he kind of knew a skeleton of the fights basically.
How long did that final fight take in Broken Path? Koichi running camera in those situations?
No. Let me think. We had a guy. Oh, I shot a film with Karen Ashley from Power Rangers. Tim Grace was producing it, her manager at the time. He was also helping to produce this one. And there was a focus puller, I believe, was and I can't remember his name, but he was running camera for us this time on this project. With Koichi, you'd be amazed at how much he could get done with very little time. And I was always impressed by that. And everyone was impressed by that, even on Power Rangers. Anybody else shooting it, any other director shooting it, it would take forever. But because he really knew exactly what he wanted, like how the story of the fight goes. He knew that as long as he got this and this and this move or whatever that ends up into this, it could take us into this part of the fight. You know what I mean? Like who's getting the upper hand, who's not, it's like he knew all of that stuff, the story of the fight. And it was just building things in there. And he also, even those things he knew. Sometimes he would just come up to me and he'd do a thing and say, Johnny, can you do this? And then he would show me and I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And then I would just do that. Or he would say, what do you think about, what do you feel comfortable doing off of this? You're going to crash. I want you to crash off of this, or are you comfortable with Dan taking you? That was definitely one day. It was one day because we ended up we shot all the main fight and then we ended up, so that was it. We did have, it was one day, but then the JKD stuff that we did towards the end, there was a possibility of making it longer, but we didn't. We ended up shortening it. And the stick fighting, I think, was going to be a little bit longer.
You got into doing motion capture.
I did. Yes.
What's the story there?
How did I get into motion capture? I auditioned for Devil May Cry 3 for the role of Dante, who was the lead in that. Ruben Langdon? Yeah, so Ruben was like, he had his studio Just Cause, right? And he had something going where he was holding the auditions for Devil May Cry 3. And he called me up, because of Alpha Stunts, and was like, hey, you want to come in? They need somebody who's, American, who knows how to do, who's an actor and a stuntman, somebody who could do both. Dan also was called into audition. Neither Dan or I got the lead role. After that, years later, they're doing Devil May Cry 4, and Ruben calls me up to come in and audition again for a different character, Nero. Long story short, that I ended up booking that one. I remember the audition process was similar to Power Rangers. You come in, you do a little bit of dialogue, and then you show some martial arts stuff, and it was just like, it wasn't hard stuff. It was like, let's see you do some kicks, let's do some punches or whatever it was. It was pretty basic. Actually, the Power Ranger one was much more complicated because flipping and whatnot. But yeah, and then after that, I booked the role of Nero, and it was my first time to go to Japan. Was working on Devil May Cry 4, and that was a whole other thing, just being in the culture, and just being there and experiencing it day in and day out, everywhere. Everyone's speaking Japanese. It was awesome. It was really, really cool. And I ended up going back there again with my band to do a tour, and I've gone back for other mocap projects. But it was awesome to go there. I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Mocap has changed quite a bit from then to now. But good experience for me. Big learning experience for me as well.
Were there similarities, things that you could draw from your time working with Koichi on these indie films, Power Rangers, or was there a big difference in how you had to move from mocap?
Well, part of the reason why I got it was they liked my movement and the way I moved. And so I didn't ask any other questions other than that. It was just like, okay. However, when I was there and we were actually going through the motions of things, my understanding, it was adjusted a little bit because I'd been doing voiceover at that time as well. So it was interesting because like they're recording my face, they're tracking my body, and they're recording kind of like a backup track from my voice, but it still had to be right. So my face had to be like film. My voice had to be like, voiceover anime. So it wouldn't be cartoony, but it was like, there's this fine line. And then my body, my movements had to be slightly bigger than normal, in order for it to read what was going on. Like I couldn't make any subtle movements. The movements had to be a little bigger than I would normally, whatever it was, like shrugging your shoulders or whatever. It had to be a little bit bigger than you would normally do or whatever. It just in order for the computer to read the tracking balls or whatnot. That was interesting because I felt like sometimes when I was making bigger movements, my face or my voice would kind of become a little cartoony. And then it was like, nope. And then I had to change that. And then it was like, they wanted me to like always look angry, they're like, do this a lot, do this, keep this, keep angry. Yeah.
Almost like you're leading two different lives. Your body's doing one thing and your face.
Yeah, it was really, it was definitely a learning curve. That had changed the next time I'd gone though. Like I didn't have to do it as big. He's like, oh, you don't need to do it as big. It's definitely better than it was before. It was different then. We also had a big old screen that, once you walked out on the stage, you can see what you look like. And you can see what the monster looks like in comparison to you and how tall it was. And you can stand there and go like, oh, okay, so if I look here, this is right, But one of the cool things though in doing, and I have some of that stuff, the motion capture stuff from DMC 4, where it was cool because the Japanese guys, it was like they'd find cardboard and duct tape and they made a giant sword or a gun that opened up, like the revolver and stuff. I'm like, what? How did you make this? And then like the creatures would be like, whatever, a tennis ball on a stick, I take the gun. Oh yeah, the gun, I would twirl the gun and I put it in my holster, but obviously I didn't have a holster on. And then there'd be a Japanese guy just waiting. And then I put it down there and he takes it and he runs off, or I take the sword, I put it on my back and there's a guy there and they run it away, So it's kind of cool just to see it was all pretend, whereas on Power Rangers, it's partly, like Zordon wasn't there in the tube or whatnot, so that was fake, but for the most part, you had these stunt actors in costume and stuff like that. But here doing mocap, you're just on a stage, and everything has to be imagined, really. which was fun. It was cool. It was great to be a part of that.
You mentioned on our call that they brought you and Ruben in because you didn't move in a Japanese way. Like, what do you think that meant?
Ruben's character Dante, like there's in the gameplay, which you'd know this, that they have when the character's idle or whatever, and the whoever's the player is, right, isn't messing with the joystick. And so the character would do something, and there's a series of things for each of our characters, like mine he would strum a guitar or dance or whatever it was. And Ruben's character for Dante, they had these things, and then Ruben was like trying to explain to them, no, because the reason why they brought us there is because they wanted it, they felt like an American doing these actions would be whatever it was is what's familiar with everyone, because everyone watches Hollywood movies, so it wouldn't be strange to anyone seeing us do the movements, Americans or whatever, right? And so Ruben was trying to point out a couple of these actions that his character was doing, like the way that Japanese people squat. They don't like take a knee like we would take a knee. They squat like, like they're going to take a poop in the woods, basically what it looks like, and it's just, it's comfortable for them. It probably makes more sense. But it doesn't read well. And so Ruben was telling them, this doesn't make sense. And he brought me over. He's like, Johnny, how would you squat? And I was like, oh, and then I showed them, and then they were like, oh, it's like, there's a different way of squatting. And then he shows me the picture. I'm like, oh yeah. And then I was like, yeah, we wouldn't do that. That's just not how we would squat, unless we were like pooping in the woods or whatnot. And there's a couple other motions that was like a Yakuza kind of guy, like a street thug, like a threatening move that they would do. And again, it was a strange motion that wasn't familiar. Somebody would pump their shoulders or something like that. Might be a thing that an American audience would understand, but this other one would have been very confusing. Just the motion. So there were things like that they had the characters doing that they were like, okay, well, if that's not what you understand, then let's not do it, because then other people are probably not going to understand it.
Rings true with a lot of what I've done in mocap also. And still to this day, when you do mocap, it kind of sucks 20% of the movement out of you. So you do something small, it's just, you do this and it looks like this. And that's because of the rig, the clothing, the physics and all. There's a lot of stuff that goes into movement that just gets lost in mocap, which gets put back in with particle effects and cloth and all that. But, when I worked on Demon Souls, the way that the director told me to move, and he was British, but he was very aware of what the Japanese style was. It was all based on a Japanese game from 2009 that had been hand keyed by a Japanese team. And he's told me, I brought a very American style from doing Kratos. And when I started moving like Kratos, he's like, he hated it. He said, no, Eric, you need to move like a Japanese character now. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? He says, it's all about how you look at the end of a movement. Did you ever find something like that in what you were doing?
Definitely, with mocap for sure. There was always a stance or a pose, like there would be a discussion. Like I would do something and there would be a discussion, and then it was something with how I ended, and I could see them because one of them would act it out, and then there's like he'd have a certain stance that he needed it to be in, which looked good. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's basically, I got to pose at the end, a certain way, depending on whatever the situation is. There was definitely where you started, whatever in between, and then how you ended. It was like a story, like the full story within that little amount of time. The only other thing would be, to stay alive, or not necessarily alive, but keep things going until you actually hear cut. Like we were talking about it, like when the stunt guys would do a fall, and then there was not just the fall, but there's the pain after the fall. So it's whatever it was, which is very like samurai, right? And then they fall. But
I think Japanese deaths are the best deaths in the world. Like when they, especially the Chambara films,
yeah,
there's something that's very, yeah, there's something uncanny about it.
it's theatrical, there's definitely a little more to it.
I was talking to an animator about this. His name is Kento. I worked with him on Mafia 3. He said it's kind of like Japanese style movement and action is very cause and effect. And that stuck with me because there's this concept in Japanese movement called ma, where
Mhm.
after you do a move, there's a pause. And I never understood what this pause is. But it seems to be that after somebody, and if you're just inculcated in Japanese culture, warfare, I don't know, language, after you do a move, you wait. You're not planning your next move. You're sort of do it Musashi style, where you do it and you just kind of wait to see what the other guy's going to do. And so in choreography, it seems to produce this aesthetic, like looking at Hiroyuki Sanada, who might be the best specimen of this, that they don't move until they need to. They're not like telegraphing. They're not telegraphing the next thing that's on their mind.
But I mean, does that come from the culture? Is that from like, and is it because of actual warfare, or is it because of, like films, Akira Kurosawa films or something?
I wanted to get a few parting words from you on Death Grip and any differences that you've noticed, any like things on this topic about the American versus Japanese style in doing music.
Death Grip, Death Grip was fun. Death Grip was was it San Diego Comic-Con? Was that where I saw you guys? Or is that, yeah? What was it called again? Contours? Contours.
Contour, yeah, Contour.
Yeah, I remember I picked that up. Like a lot of people come up to me, hey, I want to do a thing or want to shoot a thing or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, do I want to involve like a manager or an agent, or is this, but with you guys, when I watched it, I was like, oh, these guys are totally doing what I'm familiar with, what I like to watch. And you had like, it was, I mean, it was like, this is Jackie Chan all the way, man. I feel like I'm watching a Jackie Chan film, and there's like certain fights where I'm like, man, that feels like that fight that with Benny the Jet, man. I like that, whatever. There's like things in there I could see. And so I was actually excited to do it. Maybe a little nervous to play like a villain, I'm like, well, how do I approach this, and then, well, we did that, the little teaser, that the Kickstarter teaser or whatever. And I wasn't sure what things were going to be like. Really wasn't that different from working with Koichi. You did have an understanding of what you wanted. And something I saw that you were doing as an actor, I actually really kind of liked that you took the time. And I think part of that I was used to, because we did shoot 16 millimeter. We shot film on Power Rangers. So it was like, you had to keep going. You can't spend all that time. It's like, get it done, whatever the dialogue is. And then you do. So there was a very fast pace, like you felt it. Other than my own projects or other side projects, that was where I saw you taking your time. I also just liked, or you didn't show it if you felt stress. I've been on, like, because on Power Rangers, we worked with all kinds of directors, and there's some directors where you just felt this tension or the stress, or it just became a negative set, with, there's a lot of yelling or whatever, or you're doing it wrong or whatever, right? Whereas you guys kept it pretty light, and it was fun. I had a good time, and I felt bad whenever you cramped up and I laughed. Do you remember that?
Forgot about that till just now.
You cramped up and you're like, no, laugh, because then once you started laughing, it came back.
Busted my shoulder on that too. Remember that?
Yeah, well, you were doing a lot. You wanted to do a lot of things in that.
Yeah, it was my fault. Yeah. It was, you know what? That was my sort of like suicide moment back then too. I was kind of in that same. I was just like, I'm just gonna throw myself at the wall and see what happens. I'm gonna throw myself at this table and see what happens. And then And it was like, all right, shoulders busted. I'm not using my right arm, so we'll play that.
Yeah. Well, how is it now though? You're good, right? Or is
Like
it
80% to this day. It's probably as good as it'll be.
really?
Well, yeah, not 85.
Yeah. It happens to us all, man.
Yeah.
In Devil May Cry 4, I screwed up my knee. I had to carry this girl, and she wasn't heavy. She was maybe 115 pounds, if that. But I had to carry her like from a squat, like a kneeling position, right? On one knee, stand up a few times. And I had to step down. I had to jump off, not really jump off, but step down off of like a couple apple boxes to take a knee, stand up. And then I was walking back and forth with her a little bit. And all that was fine. Once we were done with it, and I'm standing around, I turn, my knee pops. And then since then, it's been like one of those things where I have to be careful with it. Like I could still do quite a few things, but it's like I got to really wrap it up. Can I do a different move than that? Can I do this instead? Or like I've had to adjust some things to my other side. So I feel you. I understand what it's like. Was it worth it though?
Oh, 100%.
All right.
That movie is almost making its money back to this day.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's a success in my opinion.
It's hard. It's hard, those things,
Oh yeah, but I didn't do it for the money. I did it because it was kind of like the same thing with Koichi. Like, well, I want to make something that's just where we can kind of express ourselves and put our best foot forward. There were a lot of great things that came from that, including the fact that I got it out of my system, right? Because you got to, like, if you're in that mode, you got to get it out, and if you can come out alive, then cool, go back to comedy. Because I did Rope It Up right after that, right? And it was like, okay, I'm just gonna stick to comedy now.
Yeah, you did have a very, like, you knew what you wanted. I could feel it. I like indie projects, indie films and things because, well, half the time you're wearing more than one hat, which I actually prefer. In this case, I really wasn't, but things were moving and I didn't feel like I was, sitting around waiting. And I kind of like that about indie projects, is that, if there's things to be done, you could actually just step in and fill in that gap, whatever it is, even if it's helping to carry some stuff.
Here's one just like really strange thing that I'm really fascinated in is like why smooth jazz is so popular in Japan, or at least it was for a long time, right? Like in lounge jazz also, and like that they were so incredibly good at it. There's something about like Japanese culture where they can take something like music, it might be an American music style, and they'll take it and they'll treat it like making a sword, man.
I 100% agree with you on that. It's whatever thing it is, I think a part of it comes with like, there's respect in what you do and not wanting to lose face. And so it's like really whatever, train and really dedicate your life to it, and there's a lot of focus on it. Like I remember when my band was there playing and we played all over the States or whatnot. And in the States, if we're not doing it ourselves, we have to like tip the sound guy, like $20 to not screw up our sound or to make it sound good. Or for them to mic our stuff or, and like, and they'll throw a mic down. Some guys they have knowledge, but it's a knowledge that they're kind of lording over you, and it's like how great they are, or whatever. Whereas when we were in Japan, there was, they had the sound guy and he was up there doing his thing. And there's people just moving a microphone and adjusting the microphone and putting the microphone in front of the amp with a flashlight, really checking. And I felt like when they were doing that, setting the amps or microphones on the amps, I felt they spent so much time like looking at it, trying to find the cone, adjusting the sound, and getting things to be whatever that guy's job was, to make sure he did the absolute best job. And I don't know, I don't think it was because we were foreigners and, and he didn't want to, do anything strange for us, but it was like he really cared for just putting that microphone in front of, and I'm used to the guys just throwing a thing down there and not even caring about where it was really in relation, unless you're recording in a studio. But it was like he was doing a professional recording, but it was just like a little dingy hole in the wall place we were playing at. But the sound there was the best sound that I'd ever heard, you know, playing anywhere else, you know. And I've played all over with, like, you know, very expensive stuff or whatnot, and then to these dingy whatever. And it was the best sound that I've ever heard, you know, in a live setting. Because half the time you can't even hear yourself or whatever. The monitors aren't leveled out right. The attention to detail. I felt that the same way with the guys in the mocap. When I was doing mocap, everybody had their little job, whatever it was. And I didn't even know what all the jobs were, but they were different jobs. Some people were just focused on whatever the camera's doing on the face, but everyone cared so much about their thing. And there's a lot of respect in that culture, you know. Strange thing where even me trying to like help out, like you know, you see a couple mats down and some guys need the mats to be moved. You run over and you kind of, or I feel like it, like I'm okay I don't mind helping out, you know, if it's going to help move things along. But if you do anything, it's like, no, 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 no. They won't let you do it, you know? And there's like, this is my job. I did see that there, especially when we played music in mocap. And whenever like they care so much about what they're doing.
There's sort of a trade union feel about it where it's like people are, you're in a category, and you're going to perfect what you do in that category.
The attention to detail, I feel, is another thing. Like my lead guitarist Polo, I feel like he's the same way with different things that he approaches. Like, you know, he's a great guitarist, you know, and he's always kind of, you know, playing and training himself. He does admit that he's a lazier Japanese guy. And part of that's probably because he's hanging around a bunch of Americans, but he does admit to that. But, you know, he had recently got a camera and he started getting lenses, you know, and we'd shot a few projects, and then I tried to like push him to do camera stuff a little bit, you know, and then try to show him a few things. And now he's just like, he's doing great. He's like shooting music videos in Japan, and his coloring is really good. His direction is really good, but he's just like, he's so like he's just become really good at it. I think it's part of their culture.
This has been awesome, dude. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I mean,
it's good, man. I'd be happy to hop on again.
This has been an interview with Johnny Young Bosch. Action Talks is available on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. Join my Telegram at t.me/Eric Jacobus. You can check out my studio at superalloyinteractive.com. My website and blog is at ericjacobus.com. And be sure to subscribe. Thank you.